Party of Elites and no dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer. This podcast is called Party of Elites. We also have a great Biden dumpster fire. The dumpster fire is expanding across the globe as Biden makes a fool of himself on the world stage once again with his constant mistakes and lack of memory. And lack of preparation, of course, but we'll get to that. First up, Party of Elites. Victor David Hanson, professor at Stanford University, comes to Hillsdale College once a year to speak and provide a lecture. And this year, his lecture, which occurred just a few days ago, that particular lecture dealt with what is going on and what happened in the last election with respect to the elites and who voted for whom. For example, did the Democrat Party draw people who are middle class to vote for them primarily? Did they draw people who were poor who voted for them primarily? Did they have people who were rich who primarily voted for them? And the same thing with the Republican Party. And where are we today, and how can we, given the events since the election of 2020, what can we do as conservatives to take back the country? And so we have three terrific clips that we've picked from this hour-long Hillsdale College lecture from Victor David Hanson, and you have to listen to this. Look, podcast listeners, this is terrific stuff. So he starts out saying the Democrat Party is the party of the very rich. Now, you hear people who are politicians who say this, right? And it's like, okay, well, that's fine, but how can we substantiate that with facts? How can we actually look at statistics and look at past elections? Well, Victor David Hanson looked at the last election. So the last national election, which was just about a year ago, a little bit less than a year ago. And he talks about that and he breaks it down for us. Really interesting stuff. Here's the first clip.
One thing we should remember is the Democratic Party is no longer the party of the middle class. If you look at the top 20 zip codes in the United States, 17 by income, 17 voted Democratic of the 20. If you look at congressional districts by wealth, the top 20 all voted Democratic. The Republican Party has evolved into a upper and middle class party. The Democratic Party is the very, very hyper-rich and the subsidized poor.
Yes. So the Democrat Party, to be clear, podcast listeners, what Victor David Hanson is saying here is the Democrat Party is not the party of just the rich, but really the hyper-rich. So in your particular community, wherever you live, podcast listeners, you may know someone who's, really successful. We're probably not talking about those people. We're talking about the hyper, ultimate, crazy rich folks. And that's the Democrat Party's base. So the hyper rich, so out of the top 20 zip codes in the United States of America, zip codes, 17 of those top 20 voted Democrat. In congressional districts, by wealth, the top 20 richest congressional districts in the United States of America all voted Democrat. So these are the richest of the rich, and they not just skew Democrat, they are 100% Democrat in congressional districts and 17 out of 20 out of the zip codes, which tells you everything you need to know about where the Democrat Party is today. Of course, the Democrat Party is also the party of the subsidized poor. This is important, okay, because there's a difference between the subsidized poor and the quote unquote working poor, folks who are vigorously working or temporarily in this situation as they move into the middle class. The subsidized poor, which are the Democrats' base as well, these are the people that are being given many, many thousands of dollars a year in benefits, whether it's federal benefits or state benefits or a combination of both. They're getting a lot of free money. They, of course, are showing their fealty to the Democrat Party for that money by voting for them. We all know this. not a surprise. It's why the Democrat Party wants open borders, right? Because the theory is with a really open and generous welfare state, those people will be the subsidized poor as well, at least temporarily, maybe permanently, if they're making enough money from the dole, from the federal dole and from the state dole. Conversely, he said the Republican Party is the party of the middle class and the upper middle class. So the middle class, of course, which is the working men and women of this country. Middle class, I mean, that's the blue collar worker. All right? Men and women. Upper middle class, probably people who are self-employed, who own small businesses or medium-sized businesses. That's the middle class. That is the core of the Republican Party. By the way, no country can belong for this world, no country, unless you have a really robust middle class. And that's the Republican Party's sweet spot, right? The part that that's the glue of the country, that keeps the country together, because these are the people that have to get up every day. They don't have a choice, and they have to work in order to be able to pay their bills. Unlike the folks that are supporting the Democrat Party, who are so rich, they don't have that same requirement. And likewise, especially now with federal unemployment benefits and state unemployment benefits, the subsidized poor, well, I know plenty of people during this pandemic, okay? And I want to make this clear, podcast listeners, there are plenty of people who are poor, and it's not necessarily a fault of their own. They had really bad parenting. They had really bad public education. They had really bad examples throughout their lives. Maybe they lived in incredibly abusive houses or incredibly unsafe neighborhoods. And I definitely feel awful for those people. There are also plenty of others who are gaming the system, and we know that. And we have to be, as a conservative movement, able to separate those two groups, because we want to move the one group who hasn't had opportunities into a society and into a place where they can have opportunities by offering them all different kinds of opportunities, such as school choice, as we've talked about many times before. But back on Victor David Hanson, he actually brings these numbers together for us about where the Democrat Party is with their base and where the Republican Party is with its base. Remember, podcast listeners, a few decades ago, the Democrat Party was the party of the blue-collar worker. And the Republican Party was the party of the small businessmen and women, as well as the rich. That is flipped. The Republican Party is now the party of the small businesses and the medium-sized business owners, as well as the working middle class. It's an incredible flip in American political history. So the wealthy, of course, when they make decisions, the super wealthy, okay, that support the Democrat Party, when they make their decisions, they are exempt from the ramifications of their policies. And Victor David Hanson speaks to this in this next clip. Pretty terrific, because it goes to exactly where we are, except that he's so good at painting the picture for you so that you have this visual, and it all makes sense when he explains it, because he does so in such a simple way. We have that clip, and here it is.
A lot of what we've been talking about are the efforts of very wealthy people in Wall Street, Silicon Valley, professional sports, Hollywood, the corporate boardroom, the military, to virtue signal their superiority because they feel guilty that they either don't feel comfortable with the poor or they don't want them around. And it's a very insidious process, this wokeness and this wealth. I don't mean wealth is good, but the idea that people have so much of it, they're exempt from the ramifications of their own ideology. You want teachers' union for others, you want prep schools for yourself. You want everybody to have solar panels, but you have a private jet. That type of attitude. And that is what globalization has become. Let me just...
So there you have it. You have, of course, Victor David Hanson saying, well, the wealthy are exempt from the ramifications of their ideology because since they are Democrats, the super wealthy, they want to provide more and more entitlements to the poor. so that those people continue to vote Democrat too. So they had this control the wealthy intentionally to do what, podcast listeners? To control national elections and state elections. So there's a marriage between the wealthy, the super wealthy, and the subsidized poor to win elections. That way, the wealthy can continue to be at the trough of government themselves for all these big government contracts, and to be able to avoid regulation, and to be able to have tax laws written that allow them to not have to live under the same consequences as the rest of us. And as Victor David Hanson said, and again, he paints this beautiful picture, the wealthy want teachers unions for the masses, but their kids go to private school. The wealthy want solar panels for everyone, but meanwhile, they have a private jet. And so they aren't being held to account for the consequences of their ideology and their policies. But now we know why. Because this is intentional by the Democrat Party. It's quite smart, by the way, too. Namely, that they have partnered, the Democrat Party has, with the wealthy, and the wealthy have also partnered with the Democrat Party. The wealthy have the Democrat Party to basically talk about how awful the country is and how awful the wealthy is. They buy them off, the wealthy does. The wealthy buys off the Democrat Party so that they don't attack them actually through policy, only through rhetoric. And then they're able to get the masses who are poor, that are subsidized and dependent, to vote for them and control elections. And then the cycle just continues again and again and again. And so then Victor Davis Hanson talks about, well, how do we fix this? As conservatives, how do we fix this problem in America? Because we want to continue to expand the middle class, and we want to expand the upper middle class as well. We want there to be upward mobility. That's really important in order to be able to expand the middle class, right? Makes sense. So here is his solution, at least a couple of solutions from Victor David Hanson as he speaks to Hillsdale. We have that clip, and here it is.
We can vote. I think there's going to be the greatest reset, if I could use Klaus Schwab's word, in the next midterm elections we've ever seen. People are very angry. And it's not a white thing or a conservative thing. I live in a city of 90% are Mexican-American, middle class. And believe me, they're very angry. And I think you're going to see everybody has to vote. The second thing is, I think people have to, according to their station, everybody has a different degree of autonomy and freedom and protection and family responsibilities, but they just have to say no. When they're called a racist, you can say, you can call me whatever you want, it has zero effect on me. If you're going to cancel somebody out, you can say, I could care less. Do your best. Do your worst. I'll do my best. But we have to all come out of the shadows and with one voice say this wokeness has a antecedent. We know what wokeness is. We saw it with the Jacobins in the French Revolution. We saw it with the Bolsheviks that hijacked the Russian Revolution. We saw it with Mao's Cultural Revolution that killed 70 million people. We know where you're going, and we're not going to take this country. We have nothing to apologize to the people who fought at Okinawa. We have nothing to apologize to the people who died at Gettysburg or the 600,000 that died to end slavery. This is a noble tradition. You're not going to hijack it. We also have to get confidence that although we have lost...
So there you have it. I mean, people just spontaneously break into applause because Victor David Hanson, who, of course, is an historian, is able to tie current events into history. And when he ties those two together, he's able to bring great light and transparency to where we are in America today, namely that we've had historical precedents to this wokeness, and it never ends well. And we have to be able to speak to those precedents and be able to call out our opponents in these elections. And it's the only way we're going to grow the party. And it's also the only way we're going to be able to educate the populace so that they understand the road that we're going down is not in any way, shape, or form sustainable. I mean, it's a terrific lecture. Again, it's Victor David Hanson at Hillsdale. I highly recommend it. You can find it on YouTube. Of course, you have to look very, very hard on YouTube to find it because they do everything they can to suggest anything but that, So, you type in Victor in YouTube, it's like Victor Borga, they're not going to show you Victor Hanson. But that's the party of elites. Next up, podcast listeners, how to deter China from invading Taiwan. Yeah, there's actually an opinion piece by Robert C. O'Brien and Alexandra B. Gray that is in the paper today titled How to Deter China from Invading Taiwan. The fall of Afghanistan and the chaotic American withdrawal from have been a propaganda windfall for autocrats across the world. Nowhere has the perception of American weakness been more trumpeted than in China, where state media outlets run predictions of American decline and warn U.S. allies and partners that they too will be abandoned. The Chinese Communist Party mouthpiece Global Times called Afghanistan an omen for Taiwan's fate. While images from Kabul have damaged U.S. global standing in the short term, Washington can ensure that its interests are protected over the long term. China's desire for a coerced unification with Taiwan is no secret. Beijing has increased military, economic, and political pressure on Taipei over the past year and shows no signs of easing up. Post-Afghanistan, deterring China from a catastrophic invasion of Taiwan must be the Biden administration's principal national security objective. So the article goes on and basically says that what the United States should do is put thousands of missiles, kind of like a pincushion, in Taiwan so that those missiles could hit ships as those ships, aircraft carriers, and personnel carriers would come across the Taiwan Straits from China in the event of an invasion. And there would be such a heavy price to pay that China simply, of course, would never take the risk because the price would be far greater than the reward. And there would be so much destruction. What exactly would you be winning at that point other than just territory? So there's another way to do it too. And I have to admit that this actually was in the works in the Trump administration, and the Biden administration, to their credit, is carrying this along. Namely, the United States is going to share nuclear submarine technology with Australia in a new pact. Now, the U.S. is already sharing that technology with the UK and has been for years. But the podcast listeners, you must know this. Our submarine technology is so far advanced from the rest of the world and has been since its inception. And of course, you've seen the Hunt for Red October, so that hasn't really changed. Our ability to be able to be stealthy underwater is second to none. But what's changed is the Trump administration realized that our true adversary in the world was China, and we needed to do more militarily to be able to deter China from being an expansionist power, because it already is, and the fact that they want to take over Taiwan, which clearly they do, they said they do. And the way we do that is by sharing nuclear submarine technology with Australia and with China so that we can together build the latest class of submarines and be able to stealthily look at what is going on in China and elsewhere. Why does that matter? Because obviously, if you have a bunch of subs under the water and the Chinese decide to invade Taiwan, they're going to do it from surface ships, and those surface ships can be taken out by the submarines very easily. So then you might say, well, what about the Chinese submarines? Well, the Chinese submarines are not even close to being as advanced as ours, and our submarines can actually hear them, among other things, hear them, see them, and take them out. In fact, we always know where they are because we are so advanced as compared to them. And kind of a funny story on this is my brother actually went to the United States Naval Academy, and the father of the nuclear submarine in the United States is Admiral Rickover, who's now dead. But he was alive at the time when my brother was at the Naval Academy, and that was the program that so many people wanted to get into. When you went to the Naval Academy, getting into subs, nuclear subs, that was the thing. I mean, it was just considered really a cool thing because we were so advanced and still are. But the thing is, Rickover was such a genius and so well respected in the military that he required you to be interviewed directly by him. I mean, it's incredible, right? It wasn't like a whole panel of people that you got interviewed by. You had to be interviewed by Rickover, and you had to be invited by him to be interviewed. So you could make the request that you want to go into nuclear subs when you graduate from the Naval Academy. But the problem is Rickover had to send you an invitation and just to get the interview. So while in his third year at the Naval Academy, my brother made the request, and then he did get an invitation from Rickover for an interview while in his fourth year at the United States Naval Academy. So the story is, my brother walks in to Rickover's office, and of course, he greets Rickover, of course, with the typical military thing, which I don't even know what that is since I'm not in the military. And Rickover looks at him and says, these are the worst grades I've ever seen in my life. Get the blank, blank, blank out of my office and never apply for this again. And so, I mean, the Naval Academy at that time was the ultimate meritocracy. I mean, Rickover wanted the smartest of the smart. I mean, he wanted people who were straight A students, but more than just straight A students. He wanted people that actually were inventors and innovators, and at the same time were going to truly be the best of the best. That's why that program is so spectacular. But I remember my brother told me that story, and I'm like, that's incredibly humiliating. You're in the United States Academy, and you're at Naval Academy, and you're working really hard, and what ends up happening is one of the things you've always wanted to do. You go in and get interviewed, and the guy's just like rips you apart, doesn't actually interview you, doesn't even interview you, and just kicks you out of the office. But that's why we are so far ahead. And I believe, and I think this makes perfect sense, this piece in the Wall Street Journal about how the United States is sharing submarine technology with the UK and Australia. I believe this really is the answer to deterring China from trying to invade Taiwan. Keep in mind, podcast listeners, we already have submarines that are deployed in those areas, I can assure you. What's changed is we're going to deploy more, and we're going to deploy them specifically in the areas around China. And we have help now from Australia, and we have help from the UK to be able to finally do what needs to be done. And that's a good thing. And so kudos to Joe Biden for continuing that policy that had been put into place by Donald Trump, namely to actually look at Asia as opposed to constantly looking at Europe and the Middle East. That's a good thing. I mean, thankfully. So next up, podcast listeners, we have the Daily Biden Dumpster Fire. Yes. So you just heard me talk about how the United States, the UK, and Australia, are getting into this pact for submarines and sharing technology and building more subs and working closely together to be the countervailing force to China. Well, Biden was on a Zoom call talking about this with the Australian Prime Minister and the UK Prime Minister. And here is the article from the New York Post. President Biden appeared to forget the name of Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison on Wednesday night while unveiling a key nuclear submarine pact, calling him pal and that fella from down under. The 78-year-old commander-in-chief, notorious for his flubs, was flanked by Morrison and UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson on giant screens as they unveiled the new AUKUS military alliance. Thank you, Boris. And I want to thank that fella down under, Biden said after a pause while turning toward the screen with Morrison, who'd already spoken. And so we actually have a clip on this podcast, listeners. It's really funny because I'm going to explain, if you can't see, if you're not watching Mark and the Millennials on YouTube and you're listening, I'm going to explain to you after you listen to this clip what had actually happened because you can see it if you're watching. And anyway, here's the clip.
Thank you. Over to you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Boris. And I want to thank that fellow down under. Thank you very much, pal. Appreciate it, Mr. Prime Minister.
So what happened there is the president of the United States is trying to look presidential. So he's standing up during the Zoom call behind a podium. And behind him is one huge screen with the UK president, and the other is the prime minister from Australia. So you've got Boris Johnson behind him, and then you got Scott Morrison on the other one. And so what happens is Biden walks away from the podium as he's saying, "Oh, thank you," because they throw it to him. And he's like, that guy from down under, because he walked away from his podium and he forgot that quickly, the name of the prime minister of Australia. And so then he walks back and he goes, yeah, way to go, man. It's just under his breath or something like that. I mean, this is embarrassing, but this is the classic Daily Biden dumpster fire from good old Joe Biden. And in Australia, this made front page news all over. I mean, all over, as you can possibly imagine. The only funny thing about this in Australia is, even though it did make front page news, Australians were tweeting all over the place about how they were kind of glad that Biden forgot the name of their prime minister because they all can't stand him because his COVID policies are Stalinist, which they are, of course. So person after person, Australia were like, good, don't call him by his name. We try to forget his name every day. It's just pretty good stuff. Except that if you're an American and you're on this side of the planet, you're really embarrassed that your president just can't remember anything. In fact, I'm sure he doesn't even remember what he had for lunch. There's no doubt about that. So get this, podcast listeners. Joe Biden, speaking of Joe Biden, he breaks his promise to average workers with his tax hike. His tax hikes will actually affect earners all the way down to $50,000. So remember, we heard that, you got to make $400,000 a year and then you're affected because those are the rich. Well, if you recall at the beginning of this podcast, someone who makes $400,000 a year is actually upper middle class. They're not rich. So those are the Republicans, and the middle class are the Republicans. It's the uber rich, as we've said ad nauseum, who are the Democrat supporters and the subsidized poor. So Biden's tax proposals are actually going after the middle class and the business owners, the upper middle class. So tax the rich, it's been the slogan for Biden administration and Democrat leaders through 2021, and many left-wing citizens are on board Biden's plans to hike taxes on wealthy Americans and corporations. Don't believe that for a minute. While at the same time promising not to hurt the working class. Don't believe that either. This is all supposedly part of his proposed $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill because he needs to pay for it. Back in March, the White House press secretary Jen Psaki made it plain the president says nobody who makes less than $400,000 a year will see an increase in taxes. However, since then, many angry Americans and Republicans on Capitol Hill have pointed out the rising cost of living, which is a tax in and of itself. And inflation continues to be a serious concern. This comes from a recent joint Committee on Taxation report, which includes a disturbing point. It's not the $400,000 a year people that have to worry. It's most people making a decent wage. And it flies directly in the face of Biden administration's promises. So the article continues and basically says the bottom line is, if you're making as little as $50,000 a year, the Biden tax hike will apply to you. You will be paying for this $3.5 trillion tax, this $3.5 trillion spending package. You will be paying for it if you're making as little as $50,000 a year. And remember, most of that $3.5 trillion is going to go to the subsidized poor and the uber rich via grants, via loans, via contracts to the federal government. And you wonder why the Democrat is part of and parcel of the uber rich and the subsidized poor. Because their spending program helps them primarily, and their taxing program affects primarily the middle class and the upper middle class. So this should come as no surprise. In fact, we called this. We actually called this like weeks ago Don't believe for 1 minute the rhetoric that it's the rich that are going to pay, because the Democrat Party, rich is the upper middle class. These are the business people because they hate business people. It's not going to be the uber rich. They're going to be unaffected. Bill Gates. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg. Oh boy. And inflation is already taxing you. There's also a shortage in supermarkets. I'm not sure if you've noticed, podcast listeners. This is coming directly from my wife, but also from me, because I've been in the same store we've been going to for many years. So we tried a few others as well, a few other supermarkets. And what we found is there are shortages again. What is going on? So in the Wall Street Journal, Thanksgiving turkey shopping has already started for supermarkets. For U.S. consumers, Thanksgiving is still 2 months away. At grocery store chains, the shopping for turkeys started last winter. Tops, which is a grocery chain, and other U.S. supermarket operators started purchasing turkeys, spices, and cranberry sauce early this year, aiming to avoid shortages that left some store shelves empty in 2020. Grocery store chains are struggling with supply chain challenges ahead of what is typically their busiest time of the year. And some executives said they are preparing for consumers to host larger gatherings than they did last year, though it is becoming less clear how people will spend holidays as the Delta variant drives COVID-19 cases higher. Quote, "We locked down turkeys in the third week of February," said Mr. Colhane, Senior Vice President of Merchandising for Tops. Supermarket executives said they have secured many holiday staples after ordering more products such as stuffing and gravy from a wider range of brands than usual, and many are trying to receive items faster so they can have them stationed in their warehouses. They say they are buying goods earlier to ensure they get as many products as possible from suppliers ahead of the holidays. The bottom line is there are supply chain issues again as it relates to food. We had this last year during the pandemic when it first started. And I know you noticed when you went into, the grocery store, the shelves were like empty in some cases. In other cases, you're just like, where's the inventory? And you saw what was missing. Initially, it was toilet paper and then paper towels. And then it went into food. And that's where we are again. Now it's food. It's food. It's turkeys. It's chicken. My wife said specifically, there's a delta of meat. There's a delta of chicken. There's a delta of turkey. What is going on? I mean, is it because we are selling this food first and foremost to foreign countries? Is that what's happening? Since those foreign countries are, for example, India and other countries affected by this pandemic, are we trying to feed the rest of the world? Is that what's happening? Is that why our grocery stores? And here's my problem. I'm bringing this up and asking this as a question because our government is going to tell us the truth. They're not going to tell us, oh yeah, the real reason there are fewer products in grocery stores, the real reason for inflation is because of the fact that we are indeed feeding the rest of the world. Because the rest of the world has been so affected by COVID that their farmers haven't been able to farm and their processors haven't been able to process. And therefore, they're buying an inordinate amount of American food, which is causing Americans to pay a lot more for their food. If that's happening, then we should be told that. We should be told that. I'm not advocating for making the rest of the world starve. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm not entirely sure that would be the case anyway. I just want to know if our government is selling us out. It's a fair question. It's a very fair question. Because why should the American people be saddled with this massive inflation at this period of time in American history? And then at the same time, we're being told, oh, it is supply chain problems. It's supply chain. I don't believe it. I do not believe at this point in the pandemic that we have supply chain problems in the United States of America. I don't believe it. In 2020, I can believe it. We were caught off guard. We're not caught off guard now. Something else is happening. And we need to be told what in the heck is happening. And is it in any way tied to the fact that, Bill Gates and others have bought, tens of thousands of acres of land? And I would like that to be answered as well. Why? Why is that happening? And maybe there isn't a connection between the two, between Bill Gates and the supply chain issues of food. So I'm not going there yet. I'm just saying the media needs to start asking questions. Why are the grocery shelves? I mean, remember the harvest in America, it's in September when you have the bounty of the harvest in America. Granted, Thanksgiving is in November, but the bounty of the harvest is really September and maybe October. We should have food everywhere, food galore, and we don't. So I got to tell you, this is really kind of a weird time in American history. And I know that you are thinking the same thing, podcast listeners, namely that something isn't quite right. And I just wish our government would tell us what is going on. And I know, just like you can't trust the Biden administration to tell you anything. So maybe it's the Department of Agriculture. Maybe they know what's happening and they can justify why these things are happening. So next up, podcast listeners, Ohio mayor puts the school board on notice. This is epic, podcast listeners. I mean, epic. So there's a mayor in Chicago, and he has done something unbelievable. A mayor in Ohio told all 5 local school board members to resign during a board meeting or face charges over class material for high schoolers he deemed child pornography. So we have a clip on this. Before we tell you about the clip, before we let you hear the clip, I want to read a little bit more of this so you understand the context. Schubert's comments, Schubert being the mayor, came in response to writing prompts found in a book called, quote, 642 or 642 Things to Write About, end quote, which had been distributed to some high school students who were taking a college credit course. So, high school students were given this book called 640 Things. So that's 642 Things to Write About. Strange name, right? For a book anyway. So what does that have to do? Well, listen to this. The material included asking students to write a sex scene you wouldn't show your mom. Rewrite the sex scene into what you would let your mom read. So that was another one. And another prompt asking students to drink a beer and describe how it tastes. In other words, a book encouraging teenagers to break the law with the drinking part of it. And the other part of it, of course, is about teachers and the curriculum writers sexualizing students and, in my opinion, obviously crossing the line. You haven't heard anything yet. There's more to it. Listen. So Monica Havens is a mother in this school district. She has a high school senior who received the book 642 Things to Write About. And she also was a teacher for 11 years, this mom. And she decided, since she's a teacher, she was able to get many of the prompts from the book that the students were supposed to write about. And this is from the book, and these are the curriculum requirements from the teachers. Listen to this. Write something about these things. Choose how you will die. I mean, we already have a problem with teenage suicide. Write something about choosing how you will die. Write a scene that begins, "It was the first time I killed a man." Describe your favorite part of a man's body using only verbs. You have a dream that you've murdered someone. Who is it? How and why did the murder happen? And what happens afterward? You are a serial killer. What TV shows are on your DVR list and why? Write a sex scene you wouldn't show your mom. Rewrite the sex scene from above into one that you'd let your mom read. You have just been caught in a bed by a jealous spouse. How will you talk your way out of this? Write a sermon for a beloved preacher who has been caught in a sex scandal. You always know when the left writes curriculum because they hate religion. And they also for whatever reason, want to sexualize minors. And I firmly believe the left believes in pedophilia, because why else would you write this? That's curriculum. Here's another one. Describe a time when you wanted to orgasm but couldn't. 10 euphemisms for sex. Now imagine if you're a teacher and one of the assignments is to say to the kids, describe a time when you wanted to orgasm but couldn't. And the kid writes this in a paper, and your teacher reading this, and it's all this private stuff which has no business in the curriculum of any school from K to 12. Wouldn't you be a criminal at that point if you're a teacher? Here's one. You are a brand new suicide hotline counselor. Describe how you feel during the course of your first call. Write a letter from the point of view of a drug addict. Drink a beer. Write about the taste. Write an X-rated Disney scenario. Write an X-rated Disney scenario. A room full of people want to sleep together. Write about that. Write about the first time you had sex. These are high school students having to write, ladies and gentlemen, about all of the things that I just described and passing that on to the teacher. Okay? They have to pass that paper on to the teacher. So this information made its way to, of course, the parents, and the parents decided to contact Hudson, Ohio Mayor Craig Schubert. He's the mayor of Hudson, Ohio. Craig Schubert decided to go to the school board and make a very brief statement. This is epic, ladies and gentlemen. Listen to what he said. Here it is.
Mr. Earl, members of the board, my name is Craig Schubert. I'm the mayor of this city. It has come to my attention that your educators are distributing essentially what is child pornography in the classroom. I've spoken to a judge this evening. She's already confirmed that. So I'm going to give you a simple choice. You either choose to resign from this Board of Education, or you will be charged. Thank you.
Is that epic? Is that epic or what? If you're wondering, podcast listeners, if you're wondering, ladies and gentlemen, how to fight back against school boards, how to fight back against the left, sexualizing your children and abusing them and breaking the law and trying to engage, the left is, in pornography and trying to engage in pedophilia, which is clearly what this is. This is clearly a bunch of sick teachers wishing they could have sex with the kids. I'm convinced. Why else would you give this to them? If you want to know how to fight back, listen to that Hudson mayor, Hudson, Ohio mayor. Listen to him. It's perfect. What he did was, before he went to the school board meeting, he probably talked to the state's attorney in his county and said, hey, wouldn't it be a crime if you, as an adult, let's just say you're not a teacher, you're an adult, and you give this list to a kid and say, hey, can you write about these things? Well, what if you're a teacher? Do they have special status? Do they have special protections? Do school boards have special protections from the law that they get to break it, but everybody else has to live by the law, but not you because you're a teacher or you're a member of the school board? I don't think so. And so apparently the judge basically said, yeah, I would issue warrants for their arrest. And so the mayor had that conversation prior to going to the school board and basically said, you need to resign or you're going to get arrested. That's how you fight back, podcast listeners. And it just doesn't stop there either. In the Daily Wire, after reviewing a Netflix show, a parent group demands child pornography investigation. It's just up too, brand new article. Through Netflix's animated series, Big Mouth bills itself as TVMA and is ostensibly intended for adults. It features, even though it's allegedly for adults, it features 12 and 13-year-old characters engaging in sex acts and includes animated nudity and graphic dialogue, according to a parent group demanding Netflix be investigated over the show. So here's the thing. If you have a show that's intended for adults and there are 12 and 13-year-olds who are engaging in sex acts, that's actually against the law. You can't do it. One scene, for example, shows a 13-year-old boy who doesn't want to be left at camp yelling, "I'll blank your," the other word starts with a D, "I'll S your D," to his departing father. Let me say that again. One scene in this show shows a 13-year-old boy who doesn't want to be left at camp, and he yells what I said before, to his father who's leaving. Another shows a group of middle school boys fully nude in a shower, waving their private parts. Still another scene shows two boys discussing mutual masturbation, sharing tips on how to masturbate, and fondling themselves in front of one another. This show is called Big Mouth. And it's on Netflix and allegedly is intended for adults. Well, obviously, they're breaking the law. So a parents group is just like, look, you got to take this off. And of course, Netflix, I'm sure, like all, progressives and out of control people in this society who are producing this crap, are probably saying, well, you can put controls on your Netflix account so your kids can't watch it. It's like, you're missing the point. It's not just that I don't want my kids to watch it. It's that you have kids on this program, whether they're animated or not. And you're trying to entertain parents with those children, and those children are engaging in sex acts. So it's not just pornography, it's pedophilia. It's people, you're basically encouraging pedophilia. You're normalizing pedophilia. And this is the left, ladies and gentlemen. This is where we are today. This is what happens when you have no morals, when you really don't care, when people look the other way, and school boards take over, and these woke mobs take over in your schools, and they teach this garbage. Johnny can't do math very well, but he sure knows a lot about all this other stuff. I mean, that's really where we are today in American history. And we, the people, need to fight back. I am convinced more than ever that the conservatives in 2022 are going to rock, because even Democrat parents, even reasonable Democrat parents and independent parents know that this stuff is bad. This is really bad stuff. They want to protect their children from this crazy stuff. It's not just a conservative thing to try to get this thing out of the public schools. So get this, podcast listeners. A study has been done on all the gun buyers in America over the past year. And guess who half of the gun buyers are in the United States? Women. Exactly the opposite of what the progressives are telling you. According to the progressives, it's white men clinging to their guns. Actually, it's women. It's actually women too. So in the Hill magazine, almost half of new gun buyers are women. Nearly half of all U.S. buyers since the start of 2019 were women, according to new data, a tremendous shift in the historically male-dominated market. Preliminary results from 2021 National Firearms Survey, obtained by the Wall Street Journal, found that an estimated 3.5 million women in the U.S. became gun owners between January 2019 and April 2021. In that same period, 4 million men became gun owners. So 3.5 million women became first-time gun owners, and 4 million men became gun owners. Past surveys have found only about 10 to 20% of gun owners were women. The National Firearms Survey polled more than 19,000 adults, one of the largest nationally population-based surveys about gun purchasing ever conducted. So, this is a real survey, podcast listeners. Researchers and gun store owners say the demographic changes in gun owners may be driven by fears driven by the COVID-19 pandemic and various protests across the country, and at times that have turned violent. The survey, designed by Deborah Azrael and Matthew Miller also found that new gun buyers were more racially diverse than previous owners who purchased additional firearms, the news outlet reported. So here we go, podcast listeners. It's not just that women as a group are almost equaling men as gun owners and purchasing guns over the past couple of years. It's also that these individuals who are buying all these guns are racially diverse. It's not, after all, white men clinging to their guns. Something else is going on. Of all new gun buyers, 55% were white, 21% were black, and 19% were Hispanic. Among women, 28% were black. So between black and Hispanic gun buyers, they made up 40% of all guns purchased. And these are guns purchased legally. Among women, 28% were black. So this tells you that gun ownership across America is happening for another reason. And I beg to tell you folks that it's not white supremacists who are buying these guns. You know who's buying these guns? People that are concerned about their safety. People who are concerned about the lack of public safety because of cancel the police nuts. And by the way, these new gun owners, the 40% of gun purchasers who are black and Hispanic, and the 28% who were black women, they're probably future Republicans. If we can find a way to talk to them and reach them and tell them how the Democrats want to eliminate the Second Amendment and cancel the police, these are probably our voters. This would be epic. This would crush the Democrat Party in 2022, and they already are going to get crushed in 2022. The American people do not support their nonsense, and these gun statistics prove it. I mean, they prove it. Previous efforts by the gun industry to market to women have had little success. The primary strategy to sell to women was known in the industry as shrink it and pink it, producing smaller guns with brighter colors, the journal reported. My wife has a pink pistol, just that one. She does. Kind of funny. Now, some companies are beginning to scrap the gendered and sexualized marketing in favor of designing guns that are just easier to use. Wendy Hoffen, chief executive of the gun rights advocacy group San Diego Gun Owners, told the Wall Street Journal that she founded the group in 2019 to combat sexual assault and domestic violence. It runs a program that pairs a woman with a female mentor for firearm training, which about 400 women have finished. Some joined the group for personal reasons. Kanisha Johnson, 39 years old, was almost killed by the father of her children in 2017 when he shot her in the head. Quote, "If any type of situation like that ever happens again, I just want to be better protected," she told the news outlet. Others say they signed up after seeing protests and riots throughout the country. With a gun, you drive into a riot, watch what we've seen on TV. At least you have a fighting chance, 70-year-old Elaine Pierce said, according to the Wall Street Journal. So this is a 74-year-old woman, and she's like, probably never had a gun before, you know, and it's like, I see these riots, and it's kind of like near where I live, and I want to know how to use a gun. So you got Granny with a gun, man, going through the riots. It's pretty amazing. This is epic stuff. These people probably were not, certainly the black and Hispanic gun owners, the new owners, are probably not Republicans, I'm quite certain. But you know what's happening? Is they're becoming Republicans, and they don't even know it. They're not even sure that has happened yet. They're morphing into Republicans because the Democrats are running every major city into the ground. And that is it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, and our website. See you next time.